Next week, Roy Smith will join us to look at corn and soybean markets. The latest report from Nebraska's National Agricultural Statistics Service lists 40% of the state's pastures and ranges in good to excellent condition, with 19% categorized as poor to very poor. Many areas have been dealing with below normal precipitation. Last month was the state's second driest June on record, with data dating back to 1895. This week's U.S. Drought Monitor indicates 16% of Nebraska is in moderate drought, the most since May 2015. Meanwhile, extreme drought, listed as D3, has expanded in the north. South Dakota has its highest chunk of D3 since 2013, North Dakota has its most since 2008, and Montana is experiencing its worst conditions in more than 12 years. Earlier this week, we talked with Nebraska Extension's Karla Jenkins about planning for less than ideal situations on pastures and ranges.
I think it'd be great if producers were thinking through a drought plan and not only planning for a drought, but putting on paper some trigger dates for when they are going to make certain management decisions. Because as ranchers, I think we're always eternal optimists, and so we just keep waiting for that rain to come. And that's kind of a bad scenario to find ourselves in, because we're always like, well, maybe next week it'll rain, maybe next week it'll rain, if we can just hold on, it'll rain. And that's just not a good drought management plan at all. So we need to have some plans in place, and then we need to have certain dates that we're going to implement those if we've not received the rain that we need.
Let's talk about some of those options. So early weaning, one of them?
So early weaning is always one of the first things that we mention as a drought mitigation plan, and that works as long as the calves are either sold in or moved into confinement somewhere and fed somewhere off of range. It does help reduce some forage intake on the cow by removing lactation. That decreases her nutrient needs and her forage intake a little bit. But that calf is eating quite a bit of forage by the time he's a weaning age or just prior to, and certainly if we take the milk away from him, he's going to eat more forage. So certainly need to do more than just wean him, need to sit down with the Excel sheet and figure out if the best thing is just to sell him at a lighter weight now, or if the better plan is to put him in dry lot and feed him until you're ready to sell him at the normal time.
Would you like producers to think about reducing stocking rates already?
I would like for producers to start thinking about reducing stocking rates and trigger dates. By such and such date, if we have not received X amount of rain, we will take this percent of the cows off. So there may be some older cows that are maybe not your best producer cows. Maybe you were planning on selling them after weaning anyway because they're older, or they're not doing as well, or their calf is not that great of a calf and you were going to sell them anyway. Make a plan and get those pulled out of there and go ahead and sell those cows. Do we have some other cows that maybe we would have kept another year or two that maybe we don't want to? So that's an option.
You want to think about feeding in confinement, but is that something that you can do on the fly?
So we can do some confinement feeding on the fly, actually, and that's certainly another option. The caveat to that is that everybody wants to save every cow they have that isn't just the small percentage that we were going to cull anyway. You really need to put pencil and paper to it and decide if the feed cost can be justified by the projected market. Am I really going to make money holding these cows? But if you feel like you are better off to hold them rather than liquidate them and then try to buy them back in a different market, then there are certainly some great options for confinement feeding, and it doesn't have to be in a feedlot. We can certainly do that on pivot corners or fallow ground, or maybe the old calving ground that we normally use in the spring, something like that. Might be some feedlots with some empty pens right now too. So definitely some options there that we need to have a plan for.
I know we're a ways from 2012 levels, but are there any applicable lessons from that year and the years after that that hold through into situations like this?
There could be some applicable lessons. One of the things that happened in 12 was we normally can't feed our way out of a drought, so that's why I initially cautioned you really got to put pencil paper to this. But that turned out to be a very widespread drought, and so a lot of cows were liquidated, and therefore buying cows back a couple of years later when it did rain was very expensive. And those may very well be the cows that we're looking at right now. Maybe we bought back some cows at the end of that drought, and liquidating them now is going to be very expensive. So some of the things that we learned during that drought is we can certainly limit feed energy-dense byproducts with some poor quality residues in confinement and maintain those cows and get through the drought and get them off of those pastures that are going to have some rest if we get into some severe drought conditions.